Folks, we got football in 2 weeks from Saturday. We've got, of course, Oklahoma football in 3 weeks from Saturday. So we are going to be getting to a place where we can actually watch football on Saturday and enjoy it. So let's savor the time. And of course, it's Oklahoma football talk right here at the Voice of College Football. We appreciate you stopping by, everyone. Please leave those comments and questions there in the chat. We appreciate your contributions in any way. Please like the video, get that out of the way, subscribe here at the Voice of College Football OU. And really the best reason to do that right now is because Jason and I get together every week. We don't always know when, but if you subscribe, then you hit the bell for the notifications. You get the notification of when we are going live. All right, edition number 151. Jason Ray's with me, of course. Jason, how you doing today?
Doing good, Mark. How about yourself?
I am doing just fine. And we are getting to a place in fall camp where there's a little bit of information, some intel coming out. So I guess we will lead right there. And again, folks, comments and questions are welcome in the chat. And what have you picked up over the last week or so?
So first, Mark, I think, one of the things in fall camp, I think that you, as a fan or as a supporter, that you think of, and you when you see news, it's not always good news in fall camp. So there's obviously injuries or, suspensions or things like that happen. So unfortunately, Oklahoma has gotten bit a little bit by the injury bug. So Jaden Gibson, wide receiver, a little bit over 300 yards a year ago, had a pretty good season last year and really came on in the spring, and then had a really good summer for Oklahoma. He's, I think they're a little hush hush on this, but he's going to be out for quite some time. Had an issue. I'm not sure if it was an ACL, MCL, whatever that is, but seems like he will be out by all accounts. He'll miss some significant time um, for. For Oklahoma this fall, which is a bummer. Like I said, I think he's a kid that had an opportunity to be one of their 3 or 4 best wide receivers. However, I think the silver lining on that for Oklahoma is the fact that Oklahoma has some depth there. And so that could be a position that they could afford to find a little bit of hit. So that's really the only significant injury. There's been a couple. Taylor Tatum, true freshman running back. He's a kid that I think he's banged up a little bit, and probably more of like a week or two type of situation. And then Nick Anderson had a little bit of a hammy strain. So I think those two aren't as obviously as significant as the Jaden Gibson injury. But this is the time early on in camp where things tend to happen a little bit, just from an injury perspective. So just wanted to make sure we started there before we kind of get into a little bit of the intel. And so I'll start kind of first. So just some of the standouts that I've heard, and I want to preface this by saying, a lot of the standouts that I've seen are more on the offensive side, and it's more. I think it's not indicative of necessarily how camp has gone so far. From everything that I've heard, the defense is, I don't know if I would say significant, but ahead of the offense, which is what you typically expect early on in camp, right? With the defense being ahead of it. But I think it's more so, and we can get to that, Mark, but I think more so the guys on defense who are expected to be contributors are the ones that are standing out. And here, there's some on the offensive side of the ball. There's some younger kids that are playing well, and maybe putting themselves into a role that we may not have identified early on. So first, from an offensive lineman, Michael Tarkin is a transfer in from USC. He's a guy that has really played well. I think so much so that he's a guy that they have been running with the ones, from an offensive line perspective, for a majority of this first week or so, week and a half of camp. And so I think most people kind of looking at this offensive line coming into the season thought perhaps that Jacob Sexton would be a guy that would be one of your but would be your left tackle. But it looks like right now, so much so that they're sliding Jacob Sexton inside a little bit. So that's something to keep an eye on from an offensive line perspective. Again, he's one of the transfers. I think Sexton probably is better. I mean, this is a very good thing, I think, from an offensive line perspective, looking at it for OU. But I think uh, because I think Sexton works a little bit better inside than he does at tackle. Maybe doesn't have quite the movement and foot speed, lateral quickness that you would like from a left tackle, and the fact that Tarkin is really kind of showing himself early on, I think is a good thing for that offensive line, kind of ahead of time. Just kind of going backwards from there, quarterback position. Excuse me. Quarterback position for Oklahoma, obviously all eyes and kind of the thoughts are on Jackson Arnold, and think there's from what I've heard and seen, I think there is a progression that the coaches and the team is really really excited about, in terms of he's not turning the ball over much, if at all. I mean, I think the he's taking care of the ball. He's making some big plays with his feet, making some big plays with his arm downfield. I think the one caveat, and I think this is something that you'll see happen with time as he develops some of that rapport with the receivers, is that there's a little bit of inconsistency from an accuracy standpoint at times, and so you would anticipate that getting better as obviously fall practice goes on, and then certainly game time goes on as well. So I know will always be interested in there, but I think maybe we've talked about Michael Hawkins a bit on here, and he's a guy that came in. I think most people thought Casey Thompson would grab that would grab that uh, backup quarterback position, and we talked a little bit about in the spring. According to some, he was one of the most impressive freshmen that was on campus, and did some good things in the spring game, and just some of the spring practices what he did, and so I'm told he's really carrying that over to fall camp here, having a really really good fall camp. His athleticism and his ability to kind of break out of the pocket and make things happen with his feet, just improvise, kind of a la. I mean, and I'm not obviously not comparing him to him at this point, but just kind of makes you, especially his stature, makes you think of a Kyler Murray in terms of how he's able to kind of get out of the pocket and make decisions out of the pocket, whether with his feet or with his arm downfield, and so I think I wouldn't be surprised to see him grab that backup role based on what I'm seeing. I think that'll be interesting to continue to watch, Mark, as we get through fall camp here. But if maybe he's the number two, but if something was to go awry with Jackson Arnold, maybe they're not. Maybe they would go with Casey Thompson, just from a experience perspective. But maybe Michael Hawkins would be the number two in name. But so I think that's something to really something to look at. And Javante Barnes, from the running back perspective, is a guy that has shown a lot early on, a lot more consistent. It seems to be a little bit more fluid. Was having problems. I think last year just had some injury problems. I had, and admittedly, through an interview early on, had some confidence problems, right? And really just not getting on the field, not getting out of the doghouse, and just was really down on himself, and so he's been a guy that's really been running right there, toe to toe, so to speak, with Gavin Sawchuk, in terms of that 1-2 punch. So I think good for Oklahoma fans to see him, because I think there was some, Oklahoma has a lot of talent at the running back position coming in, but I know it's not. They need a couple of guys to step up. They need SEC guys to show up, because you're not going to be able to rely on one running back. And Gavin Sawchuk has had some injuries in the past, so I think that's certainly good to see there. And just kind of rounding out the offense, then we can certainly go to the defense. I think kind of looking playing off of that injury for Jaden Gibson. There's been a couple of guys that are looking to step up and certainly are stepping up. JJ Hester, which has been a little bit of a forgotten name for Oklahoma, transferred a couple years ago in from Missouri, really just hasn't been able to get on the field. Sounds like he's putting a lot of this together. He's an experienced guy, been in the system. Well, I know it's a new system, but been at Oklahoma for a few years now. I believe this is his third year, if I remember right, here at Oklahoma. I think he's a senior. He might be a senior this year. I'd have to go look and just double check that. But he's a guy that's really played well. Ivan Carrion, true freshman, and I think he's really impressed with his athleticism and his size as well. So those are two guys that are I think right now everything that I'm hearing have really just made that leap, and maybe hopefully will soften the blow of Jaden Gibson leaving. That they'll need to have that depth, particularly early on.
Jason, I don't know if we have any information coming in on how any of the true freshmen are performing, but on the surface, David Stone and Taylor Tatum were the headliners in a class where there were 16 blue chippers. Is there anybody else there, or would those be the two guys that would have the best chance of making an impact, seeing the field on a regular basis out of the 2024 class?
Yeah, I think interestingly enough, there's a couple of surprises on the defensive side that I don't think a lot of people thought that might be able to make an instant impact that are really, I think, running at the very least with the twos right now. And interestingly enough, it's Dave. One of those is David Stone's teammates at IMG last year, Jaden Jackson. He's a guy that's running right now, probably running with the twos. I think Oklahoma is pretty solidified um, on the interior side of things, specifically with when you look at Dominique Williams coming over from TCU, and then got the transfer from Tennessee, last year, Dejon Terry. So I think those are the two guys that you look at up front. But Jaden Jackson's right there at the two, and I think what I've heard a little bit about David Stone, really not a ton. I think he's a guy that I think is probably if Oklahoma's looking at him to be an instant impact guy, um, I think there's probably some issues, whether that be injuries or just performance up front. Not that he's not ready. I think he's a guy that will play some, but I don't know that he's necessarily right now up in those ones and twos, but could certainly get there as well. Now I think the other guy that um, really is a bit of surprise is Eli Bowen, Peyton Bowen's brother, who's a true freshman in this year. He's right there. He's the backup to Kendall Dolby and the Cheetah. So not anywhere near as I would say anywhere near as ballyhooed in terms of a recruit like his brother Peyton was, but he like I said, he's playing right now kind of on the twos with the Cheetah, and so I think so. He's another. So those are the two that I've kind of heard some noise about that are making some noise on the defensive side of the ball. And like I said, it's not anything specific to nobody else on the defense that's standing out. It's the guys that you would expect, that you have expected over the last few years. Danny Stutzman on the linebacker core, Woody Washington, Gentry Williams, um, from the defense. I mean, from the secondary perspective, and then safeties. You've got Peyton Bowen, which was kind of a little bit of a funny clip last week. There was a question that was asked to um, that was asked to Brent Venables about Peyton Bowen, if you expect to see him on the field. And he said, "Well, if him, not who. Yeah, if not him, who? Just in terms of, yeah, there's no There's no question about that. And to be fair, they're a little bit, they've got a lot of young kids in there from a depth perspective at the safety position. So, I think you can pretty much, your top three safeties are going to be Billy Bowman, Peyton Bowen, and then Robert Spears Jennings Jr. when they go to a three safety look. But yeah, like, and so those are some of the guys that look like that they're making some plays early on. And I think you've week one, I think a lot of it's, not in pads, and then they went to shells a little bit last week, so I don't know that they're in full pads just yet, and so things like that will change a little bit. And I think one of the big, I think, hopes from a contribution perspective was Kip Lewis alongside Danny Sussman in the linebacker at the linebacker core, and he seems to. I think he had really really good instincts. I think he was a little bit light last year. He's done a really good job at kind of gaining that weight and getting to a more physical presence, and so that instinctual play has continued to be there. And then when you add the body type in there, I think that's going to be a big help. And so, um, yeah, I mean, I think the consensus has been that the defense isn't really making a whole lot of mistakes early on. They're playing solid where you would expect them to be. Um, I think I mean, commentary related to new defensive coordinator Zach Alley is that I think it's a new voice, versus what they heard in the past. And he's a little bit more, he's younger, relates to the kids a little bit better. And so I think it's been a little bit of a refreshing look for Oklahoma from a defensive perspective.
And I know I offered that up on David Stone with 9 out of the top 10 tacklers back on defense, and knowing that they brought in so much on the transfer portal along the defensive front, because anytime a true freshman plays, the good reason is because you just can't keep him off the field. He's that good. The negative situations in which that occurs is obviously we've got nobody else, and these are the best true freshmen we have, and they've got to play. And Oklahoma's not in that situation. I was just a bit curious about whether um, David Stone was in that position, but seems to be no hurry, no rush for him to move along. But of course, he's got the talent. Like you say, things change throughout the course of the season based on injuries, and also just guys stepping up in practice and getting comfortable and showing at some point that they are ready to go. Well, the opener's on a Friday night against Temple. The next Saturday, one-time conference foe for all of 1 year, Houston comes to town, and that's on September 7th. And they're going to have some throwback jerseys. I don't know where you stand, Jason, on the fashion portion of football in terms of your care for what they wear and what it looks like, and whether you're more a traditionalist or you kind of like the throwbacks. But we'll put the throwbacks on display here, and you can let us know what you think.
Yeah, Mark, I'm probably somewhere in between the two, right? I mean, I'm from a traditionalist perspective. I'm trying to remember the year. So Oklahoma actually wore these uniforms. It's been quite some time, but yeah, they wore these at one point. But yeah, I don't know, Mark. I mean, I'm kind of in the middle. I mean, it doesn't really, as a fan or just someone that's watching, doesn't really impact me one way or the other. I mean, some of the things that I don't like, and it's not really specific to Oklahoma, but the one things that I struggle with is when the uniforms don't even remotely resemble what they look like today, right?
Yeah.
But these are obviously ones that Oklahoma has worn before. And yeah, I mean, kids like it, right? I mean, it's a recruiting tool. At the end of the day, this is something that kids like. It brings kids into the program. I would hate to think that a kid chooses to go to a school simply based on the uniform, right? But at the end of the day, it is something that, I mean, I think kids are just asking for these days, the ability that that newness and freshness of uniforms that you don't see a whole lot. So yeah, it looks like there was I watched a little bit of the clip and saw the article, and it looked like it looks like it was one of those things where they have there was some genuine excitement for that. So yeah, I think that'll be interesting to see when Houston comes to town.
And yes, you basically have two versions of the alternate uniforms. Either some designer has come up with something that's completely out of left field that only somewhat represents what that school looks like, or in this case, this is a throwback. This is a Bud Wilkinson era throwback, and you saw the photos there. It very much looks like something that you would see from the 1950s or 60s, and
Hmm.
so that's a throwback to the Wilkinson era. And again, that's going to be on the 7th of September against Houston, game number 2. Jason, coach's poll came out this week. Oklahoma pretty much in that range that we would have anticipated at number 16.
Hmm.
Don't know if you've got any thoughts about that. My initial thought about any of this is, and I got asked a few questions concerning other teams when the poll came out, in terms of, do you think they're overrated or underrated, or do you think that's fair? And when you throw out the term fair, these guys can rank these teams wherever they want. I'm of the thought that as long as you're consistent, meaning sometimes you'll hear, well, the defending national champion should be ranked number 1 to start the next season. Well, then if that's the theory, if that's the approach, then why wouldn't you take the final top 25 from the previous season and just make that the preseason top 25? If that
Hmm.
applies to the national champion, doesn't that apply to everybody else?
Yep.
I don't care if Wake Forest is number 1, Rutgers is number 2. Like, it doesn't, it should, in a sense, make sense. And I guess what makes sense is taking last year's teams, considering who they lost, who they added, and then coming out with some kind of projection of how good they are. But it's just for fun. It doesn't matter. And it especially doesn't matter now that we've got a playoff with a committee deciding and their own rankings. But I will say this, that there's obvious groupthink there. That there is obvious groupthink because if you take the coaches poll, and the AP poll has to be coming out here in the next week to 10
Yeah.
days, and you
Hmm.
match those up against each other, what's going to happen? Almost every team is going to be right there or within one spot, maybe two. And it would take a lot of convincing to convince me that if you took every football writer, and we think the coaches make these votes, they typically don't. It's a sports information director, probably with the direction from a coach saying, just make sure that they're there and we're here, and maybe this other team we care about, but the rest of it, just fill it out. Um, you can't tell me that if all these people had no access to social media, didn't know what anybody else was thinking, didn't know who was supposed to be what, and just filled them out independently, that
Hmm.
they would be more sporadic. But we almost have fallen in line with understanding every offseason. These are supposed to be the top 3 or 4, and then
Hmm.
they're supposed to go in next, and they're supposed to, and it's just it's just a big group think exercise.
It really is. Yeah, that was one of the things I was going to say, Mark. It seems maybe the coaches bowl more than the AP, but yeah, the teams that are traditionally, and of course, there's going to be some nuances in there. I mean, Ole Miss is probably not a team that is traditionally in the top 6, right? And then I'm trying to look at some other, but I mean, yeah, most of the others, when you look at your top 15, they're the typical blue bloods of college football. And I'm not saying that they're incorrect and where they're at. The one I think the one that draws a I think probably looking at the top 15 overall, Mark, the one that draws maybe a little bit of eyebrows is LSU being 12. I don't know. And again, just kind of talking about how they, what they have to replace on the offensive side of the ball. And, they struggled immensely on defense last year, right? But they will have one of the best offensive lines in the country. So I think that was probably the first thing that I really took away from that. I, I I mean, Texas, they are what they are. I think they're going to be they're going to be there. They're going to be up in that top 5, 6 range just based on their schedule that we talked about a little bit last week, right? And I think the other thing that kind of was brought home is Oklahoma's going to face. We talked about the schedule as well. 6 of the top 15 in this group. When you look at Texas, Alabama, Ole Miss, Missouri, LSU, and Tennessee. So I saw something with Joel Klatt the other day, was really basically talking about the same thing. Like, I think he had Oklahoma right there in that same area. And again, like, a lot of people feel like Oklahoma probably is a little bit better than the number 16 team in the country, at least right now. But they can't put them any higher, or they won't, don't really want to put them any higher than number 16 because of the schedule, right? And I think there's an argument, I guess, that can be made when you philosophically, right? When you put together rankings, do you put together rankings on how good this team is currently, or do you put together rankings on where you think they will be because of the schedule? For me, I just rank the teams based on how good I think they are. At this point, all right, not what I project them to be. And so, but yeah, I think we thought most. For me, I thought Oklahoma coaches AP would probably be anywhere between that 14 to 18 range, and obviously with the coaches, they landed right there in the middle. There's a few. When you look at some of these teams in front of them, Mark, I think you you wonder about the quarterback position, because the quarterback position at the end of the day is going to obviously hold a lot of weight. With Florida State being a top 10, is DJ good enough? Is he good enough to carry a team in a few games here, here and there when he has to win those games, right? Drew Aller from Penn State had a really good year last year, but is he good enough to win these games, the games that he needs to win? And Michigan, kind of the same thing. I'm not sure that we quite know who's going to be starting quarterback there, but where that goes. But yeah, I think it's probably pretty fair where Oklahoma's at, you know based on what they have coming back this year, and the question marks that they probably have on just coming in at the quarterback and the offensive line position more than anything.
I've got a stat for you. So I looked at the last 3 coaches polls, preseason and postseason. So that's 25 teams per season for 2023, 22, and 21. So that's 75 teams, 25, 25, 25. How many do you think out of those 75 teams from the preseason poll finished ranked in the final top 25?
I'm gonna guess it's probably just slightly below 50%.
Okay.
50% of this.
Well, it's actually slightly above 50%, 39 out of 75.
Okay.
I think that's pretty bad. That does not
It is.
sound
Yeah.
so. The one couple caveats to that would be, one thing that you brought up is the schedule. Are these sports writers? And the answer to the question before I ask it is both, because there is no set. They're not handed a ballot, I don't believe, with any kind of instructions. Just, who do you believe are the 25, not even the 25 best teams in the country? If you want to fill it out, and this is the way I would approach it, with the 25 best teams in the country, according to my judgment. I would not look at a schedule. I would let the schedule play out and not try to grade the teams against a schedule and make a prediction about where they're going to finish. I would, if I think the seventh best team in the country, like Phil Steele, if I believe that that's Oklahoma, I'm going to rank them seventh in the country, not think, well, they're going to go 8-4 because they play such a tough schedule. So I'm going to rank them 18th. I would rank them seventh if I truly believed that they were the seventh best team in the country, and then I would allow the schedule to play out. To the writers' defense, well, this isn't the writers, but their preseason polls are just about as accurate or inaccurate as the coaches' polls. So I'm sure if I ran the numbers on them, it would be just about the same. And I guess I will when they come out with their top 25 in a few days. But the one defense I will make is that there are teams outside the top 25 at the end of the season that you could make an argument could finish in the top 25. So you could have a team at number 24 in the preseason poll and they finish 9-4 and they just so happen to be outside the final poll, but there's an argument that they could be in the poll. And I saw a number of those examples. Like Minnesota finished 9-4 2 years in a row and did not finish in the top 25. And so if that's all you knew is, well, Minnesota's not a top 25 team the last 2 years, you would draw a certain conclusion to that. But knowing that there are other 9-4 teams in the poll, they just didn't get selected.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Yeah, I mean, and I mean, it's always a good case study, right? Just to see, like, just to see where these teams end up based on where they're at or where they're projected. And one of the other things I always like to look at that's just interesting to me is some of the just how the first place votes are allocated, right? I mean, Georgia and Ohio State got the majority. I mean, obviously Georgia got the majority of them with 46 first place votes. Ohio State got 7, but then you look, Texas got 1, and Michigan got 1. So yeah, I mean, I think it's. I mean, you wonder. I mean, because I don't think it's a lot. You can't vote for your own team, right, as number one, or I don't think you can put your own team in there. I don't know the rules behind that, but
That's a great question.
anyways, Michigan specifically, as much newness as they have, to this season, that's interesting. But yeah, no, you're right. There's just a lot to be made of how much this changes from where it starts to where it ends.
I'm going to see if we can find out who voted Michigan number 1. But to your point, I don't know if a coach is able to do that, vote their team number 1. I've never heard that was outlawed. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just curious about who voted Michigan number 1. And maybe that particular person has the philosophy that I mentioned a few minutes ago, that they're the defending champions. So we're going to start them number 1 until they're not the champions. Although the term defending champion, and I use it as well, so I'm not picking on anyone because I do the same thing. They're actually not defending champions. They've already won a championship. It's not going to get taken away from them. They won this one may get taken away from them. So maybe I'm saying this the wrong year, Jason.
Yeah.
But everybody gets my point. 2023 is 2023. They can go 0-12 this year. Again, this is a bad example this year with Michigan, but
Right. Most years.
Most years, you're not going to have your championship. It's not a boxing belt. It's not the heavyweight championship that you lose and give to somebody else, and you've got to defend it every time you go out there. And again, I use the term too, so I'm not getting on
Yeah.
anyone. But actually, as soon as I look this up, I'm going to take us to another part of the poll that I am a stickler about. Um, and that's the bottom of the poll. Dun, 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 dun. All I'm finding is Ryan Day won't reveal his Ohio State vote in the coaches poll. Yeah, I don't know who voted Michigan number one. I Googled that. Let's see. Yeah, can't find that anywhere.
Hmm.
But this is what I find. And again, I don't think most people think like this. And it doesn't matter, but I find it kind of funny that these aren't necessarily just teams receiving other votes. Washington's 26, Louisville's 27, Virginia Tech's 28, SMU's 29, etc. This poll, this part of the poll is just as valid as the rest of the poll.
Oh, absolutely.
Like,
Yeah.
like there's nothing, they just stop listing them at 20. They just decide to not list anymore.
Hmm.
But this is just, these teams are part of the poll as well.
Yeah.
And sometimes you'll see a team at number 26 that only has like one or two less points
Hmm.
than a team at number 25. They just stop listing them, but
Yeah.
they're in the poll.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. And there's, to your point, there's not as much drop off as there is on some of these. So there's a 25-point drop off between Iowa and Washington. And then there's other, just for example, when you look at Clemson and Tennessee, Clemson had 657 points and
Yeah.
Tennessee had 621. Heck, between Oklahoma and Kansas State is 609 to 416. I mean, there's
Yeah.
almost 200 points difference there. So yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you.
But there's more space between Iowa and Kansas,
Hmm.
almost 40 points, 38 points, and there is between Iowa and Washington.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm with you. I've always thought that as well. Those other teams should get the same. I mean, if anyone voted them as a top 25 member, and obviously that's what's happened, or they wouldn't be getting any points here, then yeah, I think they should be counted
It,
counted in here.
yeah, it should go all the way to 40, whatever it's supposed to
Hmm.
be.
Yeah.
Uh, I've done that to play with people a little bit, and people get all uptight and go crazy. Like I release my top 25 every week, but I've done this like twice just to play with people and prove a point. I came out one week, I think I chose 37. There's the top 37. People are like, 37, you can't do that. What's that's a dumb number.
Yeah.
Well, 25 is, they're all arbitrary numbers.
Hmm.
It's
Yeah.
just a number.
Right.
There's nothing special about 25. There's it's just that's where they choose to. It used to be 20 up until
Hmm.
1989, and then they just wanted five more fan bases to be interested in their team being ranked and cause more interest in the sport. It's just a random number. It doesn't mean anything. Actually, if it was going to be done correctly, every team in the country should be ranked. And then you would end the stigma of you're ranked, you're good, you're unranked, you're no good. When, again, if we looked at the end of last season's poll, you'd see that the 5 to 6 teams that are just outside the poll are basically just as good as the couple final teams inside the poll. They just didn't quite have as many points.
Yeah. Well, and I think this conversation, Mark, is inherently why why this poll is created, right? Because there's two schools of thoughts, I think, with this. Number one, a lot of people say you should wait till some games are played. Wait till the fourth week of the season or wait till the third week of the season before before any sort of a preseason or any kind of a poll is published, right? But then there's the other like that we know, yeah, this doesn't really matter, but this is this is out there just for us to talk about, right? I mean, I think we've said it here a lot. I know that I've heard you say it but so much so that like college football has the longest off season in any other sport. So I think you need more to talk about. So I always enjoy talking about it, and I take it for what it's worth. Like it kind of it matters, but I do get certain people's point, like um, that even though the college football playoff rankings aren't, aren't this, they look at these things, right? And there's a team like, you know, I don't know, and I don't remember the week that the college football playoff rankings come out, but let's say I don't know. Let's say Florida is having an outstanding season. They couple upsets. They're 5-0, 6-0, 7, wherever they are at the time that the playoffs. Well, they started so low, people see them. Maybe they jump up to, I don't know, 20 or 19 or 18 by that point. Well, they still, even though the college football rankings may not necessarily have them that low, they're probably not going to have them in the top 4 or 5 at that point. So that's the value that I see of not releasing that. But I think it's just generically, I think it's fun to talk about.
It is, and it does have an impact on how people think. So, for example, we've got a Georgia Clemson game to start the season. Georgia's number one. If Georgia loses to Clemson on a last second field goal, wonder where they would drop. It would surprise people. People would be like, where do we drop that? They'd probably drop to 7, 8, something like that, maybe. But if Georgia was unranked and they played the same exact game against Clemson, the same Clemson team, they started unranked, they lost the game by a field goal, they would still be unranked.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah.
So anyway, it's interesting. So getting to another poll that we were curious to hear what everyone thought about Oklahoma's season. So Jason and I talked about this, I believe, last week in regards to what is a successful season for the Sooners. And maybe I could have divided this differently or better, but this is the best I could come up with 5 selections available to me. So at least 8 wins, at least 10 wins, an SEC championship game, a college football playoff appearance, or at least 1 win in the playoff. So we got 464 votes. So thank you so much for voting. And it's still open. So you are welcome to vote. It's right here on the front page of the channel. So it looks like most people are thinking, hey, if we can win either 8 or 10 games, and there isn't a large percentage that are necessarily anticipating a playoff appearance.
Which, yeah, I was thinking of that exact thing, Mark, as you were displaying this, because I think 8 wins probably doesn't get you in the playoffs. That depends on how everybody performs around you, right? But probably not. Unless you're losing to the top 4 teams in the country, and you lost each game by maybe a field goal like that. That probably would have to be kind of a perfect storm for that to happen. But yeah, I think it's interesting because I think on the 34% of at least 10 wins, and then the 17% of the CFP appearance, I think with the schedule this year, we've talked 9 wins probably gets them to the playoff, right? So, but I think this is also interesting because I think a lot of people are going to have to change the way they think about college football and the way and how it pertains to the playoffs, right? Because I think over the years, it's been like you can't lose more than 2 games to get to the playoffs, right? Two games and you're out. But now, I mean, it extends a little bit more. So if you lose 3 games, then you're probably a playoff team. Now, I know that really is going to be very dependent on what everybody does around you, and it's going to be very dependent on who you lose to, right? But um, and I think for me, I mean, I'm getting off into a tangent here, but I think for me, this is really one of the things that I love about the playoffs is that it makes more of these games meaningful down the stretch as it relates to playoff appearances, as you know, and maybe some of them didn't mean quite as much. When you got two 8-3 teams playing at the end of the year, the last game of the year, they're fighting for a potential playoff spot, opposed to fighting for bowl positioning maybe the last few years.
So, Jason, we had the conversation last week about the discrepancy between the Oklahoma schedule and the Texas schedule. And I think I actually verbalized here that sounds like a good video. So, I posted a video on the topic, and I'm glad I did because it got over 10,000 views and 276 comments. So, I was trying to configure this page so we could see the comments better. Shoot, I can't get the page to blow up differently to where we could see the comments. They're way over on the right-hand side. But I just found the comments to be, as always, interesting in that some people said, go get a Mark. That's right. They're screwing us here. And then other people were like, hey, we're Oklahoma. We should be able to play a tough schedule. We don't care. Other people thought that there was some kind of conspiracy on, like number of 276 comments. So there were tons of people saying, oh, yeah, the SEC fixes it all the time for Alabama and Georgia. And I kind of debunked that by saying, well, they really haven't, because for the last 30 years, they had a very systematic way in which they approached the schedule. Like they weren't in some laboratory and then they came out and said, here's the schedule every year. You could follow it very closely. You played everyone in your division. You played your one rival in the other division, and then the other game rotated between. And there was no thought process to it. There was no thinking, no nothing. It just was automatically formulated based on that. Now they've done a little tweaking to this going forward in 2024 and 25 in regards to trying to figure that out. And it's a little bit more nuanced, but yeah, it was just interesting to get people's takes on this. Maybe we can dive into this at a later date when I'm able to configure this better and get some actual comments, some of the best comments, because I didn't realize there were 276 of them. But it's kind of funny.
Yeah. Well, and as I said last week, Mark, I think from an Oklahoma perspective, Oklahoma's just why there hasn't been so much talk, and I mean, there's been discussion, but not. I don't think from a complaint perspective. I think Oklahoma's just honestly right now happy to be at the table. I still think that's probably the consensus with most Oklahoma fans. Like they're just thrilled to death to be at the table, and like, okay, we'll take whatever you're dishing out at now, but 4 or 5 years down the road, like, okay, this is more of a conversation. Why is this schedule happening? So, but yeah, well, I mean, and these things even out from time to time. So
Yeah. And they probably will, yes, even out. I don't think it's a conspiracy that the SEC has it out for Oklahoma in any way. I think, like you, it will even out, and we're going to see the same thing in the next few years go the other way. But for that particular team, that particular set of coaches, and especially the players, they don't care what happens in 2028. I'm not going to be playing at Oklahoma in 2028. Give us a fair schedule today. So I tend to think, hey, if you can't give the entire conference a fair schedule, then you've got a bad scheduling system.
Hmm.
Do it better. Because, as you well know, the SEC has determined that they're going to uh, schedule 2024 and 25. Then they're going to go back to the drawing board to see if they were comfortable with what transpired and then either go with it going forward or tweak it. So it only goes to show you that, yes, teams change. But if Oklahoma had a much tougher schedule, as we displayed in this video and in our discussion last week, if their schedule is that much tougher than Texas's this year, most likely it's going to be just as much of a separation next year because they're playing the same schedule.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's the same schedule. It's just flip flopped in terms of
Yeah.
home and
So
away.
they're
So
going to have
yeah.
to deal with this again next year. Now, again,
Hmm.
it's not going to be exact. We're going to find some teams and be like, oh, they're not quite as good as we thought they were, or vice versa, but it's going to be close.
Yeah. No, I think so. I think you're right. It is going to be close. But I mean, I think, as you think about this, you've got two. As I'm just kind of thinking about this off the cuff, just in terms of the home games. I mean, you've got in 2025, you'll go to Tennessee, and then you'll go to Tuscaloosa, right? Like those are two really really tough places to play. Um, and then what's the other one? Oh, the other one would be South Carolina. And again, that's a tough place to play as well, right? But you get, and then you would get LSU, Missouri at home, and Ole Miss at home as well. So yeah, and Auburn. Yeah, I forgot about Auburn. So it's 8 games. Texas is the one that'll stay the same. So yeah, will be the same thing, but hopefully in 26 it'll be like Oklahoma and Texas schedule will maybe flip flopped a little bit, or at least normalized. But by that time, I think most likely it'll be a 9-game conference season in 26. Um, but yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, just a couple tidbits. If you missed our conversation from last week or the video that I just showed, Oklahoma's SEC schedule, those teams won 64% of their games last year in the SEC, and Texas 34%. 36 and 20, 19 and 37. And when we sized them up, so I gave Jason a exercise where we listed each team's schedule top to bottom, toughest to easiest. And of course, it's not exact. We're going to disagree from time to time, but I certainly was right there with Jason's selections. Texas A&M is definitely Texas's second toughest game,
Hmm.
and Tennessee is about Oklahoma's second easiest game, and Tennessee probably is better than Texas A&M.
Yeah, I mean, at least if you
But
go by the preseason coaches poll, I mean, Tennessee's 15 and Texas A&M is like what, 25? Oh no, 20. I'm sorry, 20. So yeah.
that to me is all about what you need to know right there. I just
Hmm.
think, and I'm not an Oklahoma fan, I've got no stake in the game. I just think that's ridiculous. I think
It
that the
is.
SEC needs to do a better job scheduling. Jackson, appreciate you being here, man. Maybe if Oklahoma State wins the Big 12 and OU goes 10-2, we can get a Bedlam rematch in the college football playoff. Hey,
It's possible. Yeah, it's definitely possible. I think Oklahoma State is probably, I mean, Mark, they returned. I think if I and I'm not a big, I don't follow Oklahoma State as close. I think they returned 21 of their 22 starters from last year.
yeah, it is a ridiculous number. That sounds right. That does
And
sound right, including the
and
rushing champion in all of college
hmm
football and two really good
yeah,
receivers. And I'm not going to say too much about Alan Bowman. He's a capable quarterback,
yeah.
but
So I mean, I say that to say, I mean, I think Oklahoma State has a pretty decent chance of making the playoffs. I think them and probably, them and Kansas State and Utah are probably right there. Arizona might be in the mix a little bit as well from a Big 12 perspective. Yeah, but yeah, I don't put it out of the realm of possibilities.
And I like the way Jackson phrased it here because, of course, it doesn't matter what Oklahoma State's record is. It's all about winning the Big 12 championship.
Yeah.
And it's going to be odd seeing maybe a team from the ACC or the Big 12, and it would most likely be the Big 12, go, let's say, 8-4, sneak into a conference championship game, win the conference championship, be 9-4, and be the 4 seed in the playoffs in
Yeah.
front of some 11-1 SEC team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
That's the system.
It is. It is.
All right, Jason. Well, we appreciate you being here. I guess the last thing I'll ask you as we were going through all those things is I got to think that your focus, and it came to mind when you were talking about your lack of familiarity with Oklahoma State this year as compared to, I'm sure, in past seasons, is you've, I'm guessing, have completely shifted your preparation and your readiness for the season from all these Big 12 teams that you were so used to knowing now to the SEC.
Yeah, for the most part, Mark, I think it's kind of, I mean, and I don't know if there's a lot of Oklahoma fans that are like this. And my dad is 70 and he has followed Oklahoma football since he was a child. And so we discussed the other day how bizarre it is for Oklahoma to be in the SEC because they've been in, the Big 12, the Big 8, I think even before that, like the Big 6 before, that. So I think it's for, at least for me, I mean, I still definitely follow the Big 12. I mean, just because it's a little bit more difficult to come away from that a little bit more. But yeah, I mean, more focus is obviously more towards the SEC now. But I think just generally speaking, and I think just from an overall college football experience overall, there's a lot of things this year, Mark, that are. I mean, I think this is very much a transformational year in college football. Obviously, when you look at the playoffs, like this is the first year that there's been a 12 team playoff, which changes the dynamic of the season overall. But not only that, but the fact that there's no, I mean, for all intents and purposes, there's no more Pac-12. Um, there's only a Power Four, and there's significant movements from conference realignment in every single conference. Obviously, SEC and the Big Ten are the biggest ones. Um, but but yeah, I think for me, I mean, maybe you can kind of say this to a certain degree every year, but this is the most intriguing or the most excited I've been about college football just overall than I have in many years, just because of all the changes that you have.
We're not done here at the Voice of College Football on a Friday. So the Clemson shows at 5:30 Eastern. Join Jordan and Edward over there on the Clemson channel at 5:30 Eastern. As it states right here on the banner, Joey Foster's got the trivia night on the West Virginia channel. That's at 9 p.m. Eastern time. And then the USC call-in show. I know this has gone by a long time, but still, I know that there's a lot of emotion there. So, Oklahoma fans, head on over to the USC show, see what they're talking about. And that's at 10 Eastern and 8 o'clock there. No, yes, 8 o'clock there in the Central Time Zone. All right, Jason, appreciate you doing this as always. Good to see you. And we're 1 week closer to football, and we'll get hopefully together back next week.
Yes, sir. Enjoyed it as always.